What's up, gangos? I feel like everybody that watches these videos are like on some type of self-improvement journey, like I am myself. And recently, I've been getting more and more into psychology as I've been reading more books. I'm seeing how important psychology is in like books like 48 Laws of Power, some book about negotiating. I read a book about The Courage to Be Disliked. It's about Adlerian psychology. Yeah, Adlerian psychology, right, from Alfred Adler. And so I just been more and more interested in psychology, and I think it's very important in self-improvement. If you're trying to better yourself, you should understand how your mind works so you can better optimize or maximize your improvement progress. And so I was looking into Alfred Adler because I was like trying to like do a review of his book or whatever, and then I fell upon Sigmund Freud, which is like one of the most famous psychologists from like back in the day or whatever, 1920s, right? And I fell upon his theories, and one of them is called psychosexual or psychosocial theory, and it is so interesting. And like I have a bunch of notes on it, and I just want to talk about it because if anyone's on self-improvement, like a guy, you've heard of NoFap and like all the little things that are involved with that. And so I was doing that for a while. I kind of want to I might make a separate video on that, but beyond that, right? I feel like I feel like everybody's heard how important your sexual energy in your mind is, and it can be transferred into work, like very important work, like saying like starting a business or converting it into like going to the gym, or just it's a very strong motivational energy within like your sexual energy or whatever. And that's what I kind of got from his theory, which is like, we all know we have libido, right? And in modern day, libido is talked about as like how sexual you are, how horny or whatever, right? But when he talked about libido in modern day, libido is known as like sexual energy and how horny you are. But back in the day, he considered libido as just your overall psyche energy, and it's transmuted through like different parts of your body that are like, as you grow physically, it's expressed in different parts of it, right? And that's what I'm gonna go into. But he had 5 phases: oral, which is like your mouth; anal, which is like your anus; phallic, which is like your genitals; and latent is a phase where it's like your libido is inactive. And then you have the final one, which is actually called genital, which is like you're actually into like intercourse with another partner rather than like by yourself, right? And so he also considered the buildup of libido as like tension in your head, tension, and when you discharge your libido, it was all pleasure. And people that have done NoFap, like I had mentioned, they understand like the correlation between like pain and pleasure per se, because like you have to like really discipline yourself to not engage in said activity. And then like the longer you withhold yourself, the stronger your tolerance is, and then you're able to do other hard tasks. And that's why people try to get into like NoFap, because they're able to do less stimulating activities. And like, again, I'm not gonna talk too much about it. I want to make a separate video about that because when I did it myself, I did so much research on it. And nonetheless, another part of his theory, right, I just went through the 5 stages. He talked about your brain has 3 parts, where one part is called the ID, where it's like the things that it wants and desires. Then there's the middle part, where it's the ego, where it's almost like the decision maker between the ID and the other part, which is the super ego. And the super ego is like the controlled, disciplined part, where it's like it argues with the ID, right? And so like the way I think about it is like in the court of law, right? You have the judge, which is the ego, the middle, and then you have their ID, which is one party, and another party is the super ego. And so the super ego is like what controls you in terms of like what is socially acceptable, what's morally correct. So like when you want to go hurt someone, your super ego says, no, don't go hurt that person. You're gonna go to jail. That's not humane, this and that, right? And then your ID is the person that it's like the part of your brain that has all the desires. So it's like when you see food, you're like, oh, I want to eat that burger right now, or I want to go do this and that, like I want to go beat this person up or whatever, right? So it's all your desires versus all your moral compass. So, and people, they also like say it's like you're like an angel versus a devil or whatever. And the middle is just the person who decides which way to lean towards. And each stage is so interesting because, like I mentioned, the 5 stages, they all are associated with a particular conflict and must be resolved before you move on to the next one. And I think this is why it's so important with NoFap. Again, I won't go too into it. And there's a thing where in each stage, if you have a certain problem within it, you cause a fixation, which is like a stage occurs from desires and not being adequately met, causing frustration or so satisfied that they become overindulgent and dependent on it. And so like a common oral, so like oral is like the first phase, oral fixation would be like smoking or overeating or nail biting. And it's like, because you never moved on from that, like I'll go into more into it, but like if you were overfed like breast milk, because that's what you would do as a baby, right? That's like the first phase, oral. So if you got overfed or underfed, it like caused you to grow up in a certain aspect or what, like I don't go towards the sciences, but it would cause you to be someone overindulgent in your like eating because you want to use your mouth, or nail biting because you want to use your mouth, smoking because you need your mouth to be like stimulated or whatever, right? And so if you can learn each stage, like I'm about to explain right now, you'll understand which stage you're in, and it'll help you progress and go into the next one, because you want to move on to the next one and not be stuck in the earlier phases per se, because it is a little bit weird. And it's funny to me because I feel like, so what he described each stage, he gave it like a certain age. So like oral stage was birth to 1 year, anal was like 1 to 3 years, and I don't know if that's what he meant, as I think that's when it occurs the most. And so if you are stuck, you can be stuck in these phases even though you've gone past that age, obviously, but it occurs in that stage, and if you don't move on, you will technically, like psychosexually, you'll still be in that stage, so you'll still have those fixations, you'll still have those issues until you resolve them. But you can't really resolve problems until you know about them. And that's why when I read this whole thing, like I was reading pages and pages, I was like, oh wow, like this is why I was like this a couple months ago, this is why I was like this a couple years ago, this and that, right? So like just to go on them really quickly, right? The oral stage is birth to 1 year, focuses on the mouth, and then you have like, you get satisfied by biting, sucking, breastfeeding, chewing. Example fixation would be smoking, nail biters, overeaters due to stress. The next stage is anal stage, which is from 1 to 3 years. It's focused on the anus and is satisfied by defecating. Pleasure is in controlling and releasing their bowels. And so example fixation would be like people that in this stage who got it was connected to their potty training. So if it was like harsh or it was too late, would determine how they would be. And so anal retentive would be like if they were to like their potty training was like too late in life per se, and they would become anal. They would become anal expulsive. So they like sharing, they're rebellious, they're disorganized, they're messy. And if their potty training was early or harshly, then they became anal retentive, which means they hate messes, they're tidy, they're respectful of authority, which is like really weird, because I feel like you'll see these traits in some people and you can kind of tell. If you can ask them, oh, were they potty trained earlier thing. I asked my mom, and I'm tidy, clean, respectful of authority, and she said, yeah, when we potty trained you, it was very early and relatively harsh, because whatever, right? She's wanted it done. And then the next stage is phallic stage, which is 3 to 6 years, where you're focused on your genitals and where you're like more aware of your body and interest in the genitals of someone of the opposite gender. And it goes really deep into like these two things that you can get, which is called the opidius in males and the electra in females. This one's kind of like controversial per se, or is like not very true per se, from like other psychologists who like went over his theory. So I don't want to go too into it. I didn't really believe this part because it didn't make that much sense, but that's what it really was, is just having an interest in the other person's genitalia per se. And then the next one was latent, which is 6 years to puberty, which was your libido becomes inactive and you essentially are not as horny. You aren't like, you don't have that much interest in you don't have that much sexual desires. And it's interesting because this stage also allows you to, because your libido is inactive, you focus more so on your education, your social relationships, and life skills for like life success, which is like very, very interesting. If you like, I feel like everybody has had a phase where they don't care so much about like intercourse and like partying and like linking or whatever the case may be, just like with the opposite gender and all this, like what your libido in modern day would consist of. And like they're like completely focused on like just building life skills. They're trying to make a better life for themselves and make sure that their adult life isn't like ruined because, or like not even ruined, they just want it to be as good as possible, and they're just focused on all the positives that they can do for themselves to essentially increase their probability of success in life, okay? And then the last one, and then for this stage, fixations are typically academically or social. If a child fails, later on will struggle to make friends or fit in There's so much parts I have to cut out. Cut this part out, cut this part out, cut this part out. In this phase, it was interesting because from 6 years of puberty, it would later be determined in their life that if they, in this stage, like this age, if they were doing bad academically, they would do worse later on in life. Like they would feel incompetent, and if they failed to make friendships and like have like social connections at this age, they also failed to do it later on in life, and they felt like lonely and they felt like isolated, which makes sense because this was like a key part of their life where they had to like build either academic skill or social relationship skills, and maybe they only focus on one and they weren't able to build the other skill per se. And then the last one is genital stage, which is from puberty to adulthood, and this is when your libido reemerges and is directed towards heterosexual pleasure rather than self-pleasure. Essentially, you're just more interested in intercourse with the opposite gender rather than doing like self-pleasurable acts, and which makes sense. As like a full-grown adult, you shouldn't be still playing with yourself nonetheless. But I found this whole theory so interesting because if you can understand what I just said and look into it further, you can probably put yourself into one of these stages and understand what you need to do to move on to the next stage. Because I know grown like women who still have like nail biting issues and they're still like smoking like vapes or whatever. It's like they obviously have some sort of oral fixation, and until they fix that, they can't move on to the next stage, and they're like in a very early psychosexual stage in their life, and until they like fix that issue, they won't fix their oral fixation either. And if you're someone who's on self-improvement, you're someone who wants to focus on solving their own problems, you should know what stage you're in. And given that this theory was made in the 1920s, and I definitely, like even myself, I can find relevance to the different stages, means there's definitely some truth to it, even if it's controversial or other psychologists don't agree with it fully. There's another theory that's very similar to this. It's Erik Erikson's theory on psychosocial, and it's like his is 8 stages rather than 5. His is very interesting too. There's a lot of truth in it. You can look into it if you want, but his was so like I can find so much connection to it and relevance that I'm like, okay, there's definitely truth to it, and how can I move on to the next stage, and what stage am I in currently right now, and how can I take advantage of it? And I feel like if you can figure that out, you can essentially optimize your psychosexual psyche and really get the most out of it. Like if you are in the latent phase, you can essentially focus on like, okay, instead of asking yourself like, oh, why am I not horny? Why am I not like desiring women or men or whatever the case may be, right? You can focus on like, oh, I'm in the stage where I'm supposed to be focusing on life skills, friendships, and education. So then you can really start like zoning in on those because your mind is in the stage to focus on those anyway. And now what I was talking about with NoFap, if you're in NoFap and you're also in that stage, it would be so easy for you to just continue doing NoFap because you also have no desire to have intercourse or like pleasure yourself or whatever. So it lines up perfectly with NoFap and the latent phase. If you're in that phase, you need to get into that phase and then do NoFap then, and maybe you would like with all the libido energy that your intention that you're building up, you can like really get successful at doing something. And if you're also doing NoFap, going from the latent phase into the genitalia phase, which is the last one, it would also help because you would have no interest in self-pleasure, and you would use all your libido energy and all your sexual energy to go meet with other women or other men or whatever the case may be, rather than just like sitting at home and being a weird loser beating your shit. And again, I think this is very important. I think you should know what stage you're in. I think you should know what to work on, what to focus on, how to use NoFap effectively, and just really, again, this is psychology. At the end of the day, we all have minds, we all have brains. Learn how your brain works, learn how your mind works, and you can optimize and maximize your life and your self-improvement. We're all gonna win.